Hello, everyone. This is a bit of an experiment, a new thing that I'm thinking of doing for the channel, specifically for patrons, a kind of monthly, almost vlog thing, I suppose, talking about different channel stuff, talking about kind of what we might do on the channel, talking about new kind of like systems and stuff I've got off Kickstarter and things like that. Maybe including some other people as I go along, maybe not. But what you may be thinking is, I am not on the Telling Tales Patreon, Matt. Why am I seeing this? Well, that's because in a blatant move to kind of FOMO you all into signing up for our Patreon, this will be going out for free on YouTube to people. But all future vlog things like this that hopefully should be in a kind of like monthly format, maybe, will be patrons only, and specifically for patrons at our, I think it's our $5 or more tier. I probably should check that. Oh, I'm on a computer. I can check that. Um, yeah, I think it's Oh, it's £5. It's called Tales of Secrecy, and it's like behind the scenes stuff and things. And to be honest, we've been struggling a little bit with finding stuff to put in that here to give out to people. One of the things that people frequently ask for is sort of kind of prep material, and it's sort of increasingly difficult to put that in front of people, because, and this is just speaking from my perspective, an awful lot of my prep material isn't very readable to other people and is in kind of weird formats, or in the case of kind of the thing I do most on the channel, Symbaroum, I can't put the prep material out as a Patreon thing because it would essentially be selling Free League's material, because it's all pre-written. So yeah, so I've been thinking about kind of ways in which to add stuff to that tier, and this is the latest idea. Let me know what you think. Yeah, there may be some kind of teasers and things in here that you'd consider kind of spoilers a bit, I guess, but I'll make sure to flag whenever they're upcoming and people can skip forward and whatever. You may also be wondering why I am so small on the screen. I am saving your eyeballs and brains from the horrors of my full screen cam, which is a little behind the times now, I have to say, and strobes a little bit and does weird things with lights, especially in the day as I'm recording this here. But yeah, and I'm just going to pop some images up over on that side, which is why that's there. And yeah, we'll see if this is something people like. But the first thing we're going to talk about today in this inaugural thing is GROK. GROK. Okay, so GROK is a pretty small, kind of zine-sized indie TTRPG by Lester Burton. I'm sorry in that I don't particularly know anything else Lester Burton has done. It came out last year, 2022. It was kickstarted, and I honestly can't remember how I found the Kickstarter for this. I think I literally it was one of my recommended Kickstarters, I think, when I looked at something else. And I was just drawn in by the art style, which I don't know if you can see, but it's this kind of like gonzo 60s, 70s fantasy sci-fi thing, which I'm finding increasingly appealing these days. GROK is the next one shot we're running on the channel. We're actually running it this weekend coming, which may well be long gone by the time you watch this, but it's Sunday the 13th, I think. Yeah, the 12th. Sunday the 12th of November. Looking forward to it. It's quite rules light, as you would imagine from a thing of this size. It's got that kind of thing where a lot of indie TTRPG rules light things do now, where everything is framed in terms of sort of individual definitions. I know what I mean by that, but you might not. So, for example, you've got things like how everything that relates to something a player has is called like a trait or an asset or an aspect or something like that, and it's an odd way to do things from my brain because it's like these things I'm used to kind of things in systems, I suppose, that have terminology like that actually having kind of maybe specific mechanics that plug into them, and not all things like this in indie TTRPGs necessarily have mechanics that plug into them, beyond sort of narrative ones maybe. um, so it sometimes jars for me a little bit, I suppose. I found it I relate it in a similar way in the Forged in the Dark system, to kind of effect and position, which I often struggle to kind of like relate in my head to things that's actually happening in the game. And I think what it is an effort from the creator, um, to sort of relate these concepts for people who may not be so familiar with having an abstract narrative running through their head, maybe less experienced players and GMs and whatever. But for me, it almost provides like this extra barrier to something that I do automatically. But because it's included in the game, I feel I have to like engage with it directly and explicitly rather than necessarily just let the thing flow through my head. But regardless of that, it's not something that's kind of overbearing in GROK, and I'm really looking forward to running it. It's got a cool, imaginative, weird ass world, of this kind of like fantasy, like I say, gonzo fantasy sci-fi blend. Um, you're basically in this kind of post-apocalyptic world where everything is kind of cracked apart and been destroyed. There's this sort of almost Dyson sphere, but not quite, sort of thing surrounding the entire world, like this vast sort of planet-spanning space station thing that may or may not be in particularly good repair if you reach it, and yeah, lots of weirdo stuff like that, essentially. And what I thought we could do while we're here, folks, and this, I suppose, is a bit of a spoilery thing, but what I might do is do some random generation of stuff in the book. So you can, like, this will give you an insight into my entire process of kind of like how I put together a one shot or a scenario, based on just like a little bit of dice rolling. But it will, hopefully, if you watch me do this and kind of see what I've rolled, and then you watch the one shot, that might give you some clue to like how I've reached from point A to point B. Of course, it's a possibility that I could do something for Patreons. I keep saying Patreons, which is idiotic. For patrons from Patreon, I could do something where I run through or even just a stream where I run through sort of full scenario creation beginning to end. It would probably get quite boring around the midpoint when I start to sit down and just come up with ideas and type them into Excel. And yes, that is what I do. But it's an option I could do. Let me think about that. But first, shall we get this? Let's get a few things for this GROK scenario rolled up. And like I say, if you want to come to GROK completely clean, kind of with no idea what's going to happen or whatever, then maybe skip this bit to the next bit. There'll be a kind of title card thing, and I'll probably put chapters in the video, so you should be able to do so fairly easily. But yeah, so there's kind of a scenario generator. I'm a bit wary about waving pages too much at the screen because the chances are, if you want GROK, you're going to just go buy GROK. It's not that expensive, but there's an element of giving it away for free by flashing up like big scenario tables and stuff like that, which I'd rather not do. So there's a scenario generator in this which has like a 4-part like summary, which is just a noun is verbing a noun in a noun. Don't think too much about that. And we're just going to roll this and see what we think. And this is generally speaking, when I use tables to generate things randomly, there's absolutely an element of editing that later. So, in other words, if we roll this and I'm like, one of these components doesn't feel right or doesn't feel satisfying, I'll just re-roll it. That's like, to me, such like a bargain basement terrible tip, because it's like, well, obviously. Um, but a lot of people out there will, I think, will kind of quite doggedly try and push something to work where it might not because it's been randomly generated. That kind of like OSR urge, I guess, to kind of forge everything together via the the crucible of the die roll. But I think you do need to look and see where something isn't working. Okay, well, let's give this a go. Let's give this a go. So what we have is a band of cutthroats, which feel off the top, that feels maybe a little humdrum, but we'll see what else comes out of it. Is hiding from. Okay, so that's more interesting instantly. So it's possible that these cutthroats aren't actually the antagonist, right? So that could be more of a thing that we can do. Hiding from a shell-shocked Gatling gun. Okay, now this is getting weird enough that it's interesting. So my immediate thought is that this shell-shocked Gatling gun is like, because you're living in the kind of sort of in the fantasy ruins of like a sci-fi past, right? In GROK, and my immediate thought obviously is that this shell-shocked Gatling gun is like this AI or robotic being, right? That's like maybe not functioning completely correctly and is following parameters whereby perhaps this band of cutthroats do or don't deserve to be mowed down by a sentient Gatling gun, but that might be for the players to decide. In rolled a one there, in an abandoned mine. Okay. Now, at the beginning of this, I thought that the band of cutthroats might be the thing I re-roll, but I don't actually mind that in this. What I think I might re-roll is the abandoned mine, because it's pretty. It doesn't need to be humdrum, but it's pretty straightforward, right? Like, and it's maybe not showing GROK off to its greatest like imaginative potential. Although of course I could do weird stuff with the abandoned mine. There's no reason it couldn't be like weird or odd or gonzo in its own way as I add elements and stuff. But I like an alternate and see maybe which one I prefer, and then maybe pick one of those, or then reroll it again if we don't like that. Okay, I rolled one twice in a row there, so evidently the fates want me to go with that. And my net, I literally have rolled one 3 times in a row on the D20. By the way, these are on D20. You can't fight that. You cannot fight that. So I suspect that is what we'll go with. We'll leave it there for now. There's always a possibility that before this Sunday I will look at this and decide to like reroll some of them. Out of interest, what would be my alternate to Band of Cutthroats? I'm just rolling the same numbers over and over again. It would be Putrid Ooze. Question mark? Putrid Ooze? Question mark? We'll see. I suspect I'll go with the Band of Cutthroats. What do you think? What do you think, people who can't reply? We'll see. I'm then going to do a bit of extra sort of. There's some other tables in it, and I thought we'd do maybe a bit of extra stuff. We've got a DC creation, which is essentially NPC creation. They're called director creations, I think, in or director characters, I guess, in this. So let's come up with some weirdo who's occupying this story, shall we? And let's generate their traits first, which are like their sort of, I guess, physical and character elements within the game. So the first one we will roll on is appearance, and that is beautiful. And then we will go with their form, which is ooze. Okay, so it sounds like this putrid, beautiful ooze is featuring no matter what. They have an abnormality, which is going to be that they're shape changing, which feels pretty appropriate for an ooze, if you ask me. And then they have a motivation, which is to hoard riches. I mean, yeah, pretty standard story stuff. And then we need to give them resource slots. 1 to 2 slots for every sequence you want a conflict to last. I haven't properly devoured the rules yet, so I don't necessarily know what that means, but let me just very quickly look up the notion of sequences. Multiple actions and threats. Okay, yeah, I think it's basically like, you maybe roll 1 or 2 if you want them to just be a general encounter, but maybe as a primary antagonist, you'd want more than that. So do we? I mean, this is the thing. Do we want this ooze? Maybe the ooze is the leader of the cutthroats, because this beautiful, putrid, shape-changing ooze wants to hoard riches, right? And that's kind of what cutthroats are liable to be doing. So maybe it's the leader of them. I think it's the leader of them. So perhaps they don't need to be our primary antagonist, or maybe they are, because maybe we find out that the shell shock Gatling gun is actually on the level and is, I don't know, something like that. So maybe, okay, well, it says 1 to 2 slots for every sequence you want a conflict to last. I'm going to roll 3 resource slots, okay? Yeah. If there are, I see. If there are multiple director characters in the conflict, estimate how many sequences you want the conflict to last. Calculate 1 to 2 resource slots for each sequence, then divide the resource slots among all the director characters. Okay, yeah. How that actually works, though. So what are resource slots? I don't know. Is it just loot? Is that a loot thing? Maybe that's a thing. I don't immediately know, but that's fine. We've talked about that too much. Let's move on. Assignment to 4 assets or roll on the table below. So we're going to give them some assets. And we already mentioned 3, so let's go with 3, right? This putrid ooze, who may or may not lead these cutthroats, first off has a cloth of rematerialization. What is that? Perhaps, given their shape-changing nature, it's the thing that allows them to take their original form again. So maybe if you take that away, they forget how to change back into their natural shape, something like that. Second asset is a hover disc. As an old school lover of Tzeentch in Warhammer, I love me a hover disc. And we have a speaking potted plant, who may or may not be the mastermind of the whole operation. Okay, so we've created I'm thinking that's going to be the leader of this band of cutthroats. One way or another, I feel like that's sort of a thing we could do. And now the other thing I was going to maybe do is there's some information in here on like the different locations on planet GROK, right? We've got a sort of simulacrum infrastructure, these like floating islands, the wastelands and the planet's surface. Yeah, I think the simulacrum is like this orbiting, wrecked, vast space station. Got the underworld and these near endless networks of tunnels, caves, and bunkers and stuff. Yeah. Well, let's generate a couple of things. Let's generate, I think with the, if we roll on the underworld one, right, we can perhaps like come up with something a bit more precise, maybe for this notion of an abandoned mine, or something that could have more kind of interesting elements to it, right? Than just it's a mine with tunnels or whatever. So let's give that a go. Let's go with rolling on this underworld table, and let's get. So it's a military complex, and maybe this is the actual thing, or maybe it's adjacent to it, or whatever. Because we don't have to lose the abandoned mine if we don't want. The military complex immediately works with the sentient Gatling gun, right? Inhabited with filthy, rolling the same numbers over, and filthy aberrations. Sure. That smell delicious. Well, you know, I can see why the cutthroats would want to be down there. Who wouldn't want to be surrounded by delicious smelling, filthy aberrations? And then there's a little table to generate points of interest as well. Let's generate one of those. Let's see how these go. It is, we've got a 5 there and then a 20. It is a dilapidated waterfall. Dilapidated waterfall with a sentry gun. Okay. And trapped. So that's meant to be cocoons. And trapped cocoons. Okay. So a few things immediately spring to mind. In my head, a dilapidated waterfall is a good hideout for the cutthroats, and perhaps they have the sentry gun there to try and kind of like ward off the Gatling gun. But maybe that's a thing that a Gatling gun or the players or whatever might take advantage of. Trapped cocoons. I mean, are those trapped cocoons of the delicious smelling filthy aberrations? That seems like a good follow through. And maybe there could be an element. See, I'm already thinking like the notion is like maybe the players get hired to help the cutthroats, maybe by allies of them on the surface or something. But along the way, they discover that actually the cutthroats are, you know, cutthroats with all that implies. The Gatling gun's just a good dude, trying to keep all these filthy aberrations safe, and the filthy aberrations have their cocoons that are kind of maybe sort of like they're young or something like that in this waterfall, and they're trying to get them free, something like that. That's my idea. We'll see how that makes contact with actually planning this out. Although the planning will be fairly light, I think, because GROK is meant to be quite, at least a little bit, kind of improvisational or, you know, off the cuff in nature. We'll see how that makes contact with that, and you know, tune in and watch GROK, see what I do with all of that ridiculous information. Okay, let's talk about teeth. Which is something that's just arrived for me in the last few days. I want to say, I mean, I'll call it self-published, I guess, because I don't think there's technically a kind of publisher behind it. But it's by Jim Rossignol and Marsh Davis. Mosh Davis being the artist, I believe. Jim Rossinol has done kind of video game writing and also used to be, I think, one of the original writers for Rock Paper Shotgun, if people are familiar with that particular PC gaming website. We ran a one-shot of Teeth quite a while ago now, like last year at some point, I think, maybe last summer. But what we were running was one of the sort of scenarios, whatever you want to call it, scenario playbook zine that came out a while ago for Teeth. And I don't know if when they wrote these, like from the beginning, they had the notion of pulling it all together into one sort of coherent system. But regardless, the one we ran was Night of the Hogmen. And if I'm smart and clever, I'll put some kind of link to the one shot in the description below. But if not, just search and you'll find it. The others being Blood Cotillion and Stranger and Stranger. I don't really know too much about these ones. Night of the Hogman is the only one I've read properly and run. But now, off the back of this Kickstarter, there is the full version. Incidentally, I did get the physical version of these zines as part of the package with the Kickstarter I got. It's like the full physical system and setting and stuff. System-wise, it's Forged in the Dark, so it's part of that extended family of that extended family system. I don't know, whatever you'd call it. When I play, I haven't, full disclosure, I have not read this yet. When we played Night of the Hogman, I felt it was one of the closest Forged in the Dark games I played to the original Blades in the Dark. Like it felt very similar, kind of extended use of clocks, kind of the stats were kind of similar. And maybe because of the setting, the vibe, that same vibe of Blades in the Dark carried through quite a lot. Not that they're identical settings by any means. In Teeth, you play in, but again, I'm going just from Night of the Hogman here, but I'm assuming Teeth is pretty much matches it. Night of the Hogman is set in kind of the north of England in a sort of slightly anonymous time frame around the end of the 1700s and the beginning of the 1800s. I think Teeth might definitively shift that to the beginning of the 1800s, but that's just from flicking through it, so don't take my word for it. And it's got a kind of not exactly steampunk vibe to it, in the same way that Blades in the Dark does, but certainly that kind of like alternate history, kind of weird history feel to it, right? Where there's big elements of horror, slight elements of fantasy, all bleeding through into this sort of pretty recognizable world of our actual history. I really liked how Night of the Hogman did that, because it had this over the top sort of horror that was a bit silly but also horrific. And that time period isn't one that gets delved into too much. And anyone who speaks to me about this kind of thing, or maybe even watches the channel, I might have spoken about it before, I'm really a sucker for a historical or pseudo-historical setting that hasn't been mined to death by 1,000 IPs. And this really kind of has that feel to it. It's kind of like Regency and Highwayman and that kind of vibe to it, which I really appreciate. I'll almost certainly be running some Teeth on the channel at some point, I would imagine. Whether I do my own thing, or I'm assuming there's probably some scenario. There seems to be a lot of setting info in this core book to make use of, which is really quite thick. But equally, if you're like, Matt, you really need to run Blood Cotillion, it's really good, then let me know. Let me know what you'd think of that. None of this is meant to be in any way like a review, and certainly not promotional stuff. I've paid for everything I showed, certainly so far. And the only thing I'd say is, as a package, this is really nice. I really like the art. I really like the presentation. But the only thing I'd say, and anytime something like this comes up, I will speak my mind and say anything slightly critical. Not a big fan of the binding on this. I suspect with a bit of hefty browsing, it would crack pretty easily. But that just seems to be a danger with a lot of sort of self-published stuff at the moment. I know one reason I haven't picked up the not that it's self-published, but but print stuff on Drive-Through RPG. One of the reasons I haven't got physical versions of 20th edition World of Darkness stuff yet is whenever I go and look on there, people are like, yeah, the bindings are, I hope you're not intending to use this book as anything but something on your shelf, because the binding will go. I'm not saying that's going to happen with either. I'm not saying that at all, but it just gives me. It's a bit creaky. It doesn't open too wide before you start to hit resistance, and which is, it's ultimately, and it's obviously an aesthetic choice to have this almost like Bible-like form of hardcover with this kind of thickness to it. And hey, I appreciate that. It's just, if you're a stickler for those kind of things, maybe have a look at it yourself before you order it. I don't know. But as I said, I haven't read it fully, so I can't really speak to the content too much yet. But if it's anything like Knights of the Hogmen, I'm going to enjoy it very much. Okay, so something I wanted to talk about today is a sort of sneak peek at upcoming stuff in Symbaroum. Not kind of precise story beats or anything like that, but kind of talking about where I'm going to take the campaign next. If you don't want to know that, obviously skip this bit, and I completely understand that. Coming to it completely fresh. I think this will be interesting for people who know Throne of Thorns and the other published Symbaroum material a bit. Similarly, it's not really going to give anything away other than the order in which I'm going to put some stories forward and maybe kind of roughly where they take place. So if you're worried about specific story beat spoilers, there's not going to be any of that in here. But if you don't want to know anything at all, then I'd say skip this chapter in the scrubby thing. And yeah. Okay. So at the moment on Symbaroum, we are playing Witchhammer. Here it is. Lovely, lovely Witchhammer. Fully continuing the Throne of Thorns theme of why is this thing called this? But other than that, yeah, enjoyable. I feel like it's... we've talked about this numerous times on the stream, I think. Throne of Thorns and sort of Symbaroum in general, I definitely feel is like got a really, really solid core of a good yarn, a great setting, but a lot of the like fine detail is difficult to connect up, which I would say most of my work with the Witchhammer has been stringing everything together in a coherent fashion to make it feel a bit less like adventurers go over here, go over there, go over here, to make that flow a bit more. But yeah, otherwise, have really enjoyed Witchhammer. The next big noises, the next big arc in Throne of Thorns is Darkest Star, which is, a cool name. But beyond that, in the same way that Witchhammer is called Carvosti, the Witchhammer, in the same way that Wrath of the Warden is called Thistlehold, Wrath of the Warden, this is Indaros, the Darkest Star, Indaros being the capital of Ambria. So it may be no particular shocker to find out that that is where we are going. However, I am taking advantage of the players heading southwards in order to feature a number of side stories, because it's sort of we've I think pretty much always done this in the campaign so far, in that we had sort of the Copper Crown that kicked off with my own adapted prologue. And then between Copper Crown and Wrath of the Warden, we had Fever of the Hunt and Beltolds for Castor. And then essentially in between Wrath of the Warden and Witchhammer, even though we titled them as Witchhammer episodes, we had Green as Copper and Blooming Vale, which were both pretty short scenarios, but nonetheless kind of side stories. In the same way, I'm planning to put one or possibly two stories between Witchhammer and Darkest Star. These are stories that feature in Adventure Pack 3, which is where I've got it up over there. But my copy of Adventure Pack 3 is part of this, which is the Adventure Collection. That I think I got it as part of the Kickstarter of, I'm going to say, Albert with a Howling Way. So was that just a pre-order? Did I get this? I think I might have got this with Mother of Darkness, which is part 4 of Throne of Thorns. Anyway, that's irrelevant. This has a few things in it. The Adventure Collection has the first 3 adventure packs, and a lot of this stuff we've already done. It has even the small things like, does it have like Blight Knight and the River Maiden in it? Which are obviously pretty small things we already did. Oh, maybe not. It's got Copper Crown and it's got Mark of the Beast and Tomb of Dying Dreams. So it's got all the Copper Crown in it, I think, or at least, well, you don't need Promised Land because it's already in the core book. And it has, Fever of the Hunt here, Beltolds for Castor, and then moving on to what was in Adventure Pack 3. We've got 2 stories. There's The Howling of Damned Gods, which takes place in Prios Pass, which we haven't seen since the very first episode of our Symbaroum campaign, because it's part of the Titans, where people pass over from the ruins of Alberator to Ambria. I don't know if I'm using this one between the two before we do Darkest Star. Maybe, or I might leave it till after that. I'll need to kind of reread it and kind of digest it through, I think, before I make that decision. But they're going to be down near Indaros anyway, right? So, and Prios Pass is, it's not near Indaros, but it's certainly closer than where they are now. So maybe. What I am definitely going to run, and I'm going to run this directly after the Witchhammer, is a story in here called What's Bred in the Bone. What's Bred in the Bone is a really good story to run right now for various reasons, which I won't go too into because, again, I don't want to spoiler it. But it does take place in Ravenna, which, as regular viewers will know, is where Father Anton went on his little kind of side quest. It features Duke Inadar and other characters that Anton met while he was there. So it feels like a really appropriate place to put it, to like bring the other characters into like this area in this world, right? And thematically, for reasons I am not going to go into, and in terms of the meta plot, for reasons I'm not going to go into, it's a very good point to put it, and it'll be quite satisfying, I think, to do so. And hopefully, if you're out there and you have read it and have read kind of Throne of Thorns in general, or at least parts of it, then you will go, yes, Matt, that is an amazing notion of something to do. So that's my plan for the immediate future of Symbaroum. What's Bred in the Bone is coming next, and then either Howling of the Damned Gods and then Darkest Star, or the other way around. There is an Adventure Pack 4, so I don't know where those will sit. I haven't read those, so I don't know where those will sit around Mother of Darkness. But we'll see. And that's so far in the future. Because I don't think Darkest Star is necessarily any shorter than Witchhammer. And that's taken us, a year and a half to plug our way through. So it's going to be a while before I have to worry about that. But that's a plan anyway. That's the Symbaroum plan. Simba plan. Simba, stop. It's not funny. And sort of the last thing I wanted to maybe do today is and this will be just real quick because I think people might be interested as to how a lot of this kind of like works behind the scenes, maybe like how we get games going might be of interest to people. I don't know. I thought I'd throw it out there anyway. Um, but we have a kind of process that sometimes we follow and sometimes we don't, whereby perspective, and I'll just use GM. I know, like, obviously different games have a different terminology for these things, or don't have a GM concept at all. But the GM or organizer kind of posts a kind of like a little advert for the game in a Google sheet that we have that I do really nerdy color coding of. I'll probably pop a couple of shots of it up on the screen for you to look at through this. And then essentially I then kind of like nudge and kick people backstage on the Discord to like sign up for these. And when something is sort of nearing the capacity that the GM or organizer wants it to have, they will reach out to people and try and kind of like schedule it. We've got a little calendar that's in the same, that's like a tab on the same sheet. And hopefully they can like wrangle that group into submission to actually like making it happen. And we've got like, we've got different areas for like one shots or series or big ongoing things or whatever. It's quite a slow process because obviously like, I think I'm like, I'm talking for so long. Unlike many, if you're streaming video games or whatever, you're liable to change those up faster than you are with like TTRPG stuff. So we have this thing where like mostly if something's ongoing, as long as it's not a one shot, like the least amount of time it will take is like maybe 6 or 8 weeks. And that's assuming that all those sessions happen on a weekly basis, that there's no breaks. So things, there's always a lot of forward planning to be done. And I know like people on the crew may or may not feel that I do a bit too much of that forward planning. But that's my kind of like nature, and like some how I've made my money in the past has been on like planning things in quite fine detail. So yeah, that's kind of how we arrange it and how we do it, and then everything's sorted out in backstage channels in Discord. Is that interesting? I don't even know if any of that is interesting. A lot of people like to see how the sausage gets made with these things, but as with many things with streaming or like YouTube channels and stuff, which I've done, not overwhelmingly successfully, or even successfully, but I've done this kind of thing for 10 years now. And something I think people don't really appreciate too much is the administration that goes into something like this. Unless you're someone who like hops onto Twitch and kind of makes your money on there by either being charismatic or a charisma vacuum, which seem equally successful tactics, and like just reacting to things or whatever. I mean, even there's some administration to be done if you want to make it properly successful. But if you're doing any work that like requires a lot of preparation or even some preparation, there's a lot that goes into this, as everyone on the crew will tell you. Kind of, if you think about just producing one stream, like a single one-shot stream, let's say that stream is going to be about 4 hours long. If it's let's say it's an average, and I'm just using me as an example here. Other people on the channel may be different. An average 4-hour stream is probably going to take about 8 hours of GM prep for me. I tend to go with the line of like doubling it, right? And that is like, either if it's a pre-written scenario, putting that in a format that's easier for me to read while I'm on stream, or if it's creating the thing from scratch, it's doing that, maybe informed by tables and blah, 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 blah. Something like Land of Eam, for example, where a lot of it was inspired by things I rolled in the book, but nevertheless, I kind of put it together sort of from scratch. And that all gets plugged, in my case, into an Excel sheet, because that's just how my brain takes in, like, it's a system that my brain can take in information from really easily. So that's about 8 hours of prep. I'd say on top of that, not all at once, but I would say there is probably 2 or 3 hours of administration and coordination to get the whole thing off the ground in the first place. And obviously that doesn't all happen at once. That's spread out over weeks. But it's still, that's time consumed when it comes together. Then obviously we've got the time taken for the people to make their characters. Obviously that depends on the system, but typically, what's that going to take up between half an hour and an hour for most systems, I guess, for people to do that. And if there's 4 or 5 players, that represents, that amount of time, 2.5, 3 hours or whatever. And then we have asset creation. The main people who create assets for us are Steve and John. Other people dabble as well. And for asset creation, we need a number of things. We need promo cards that go out on, YouTube social stuff and Twitter and Instagram and things like that. We need their respective thumbnails. We may or may not require assets being pulled together or being pulled from the books for use on stream. So kind of sometimes that's as easy as clipping things, but sometimes those clipping things are spread across pages and need consolidating or need bits taken out or whatever. And often John will be the person doing that. So that's a big amount of time. And then on top of that, there's the actual promotion to do, which doesn't tend to be too much nowadays. I've sort of soft given up a bit on some of the promotion because it doesn't seem to really have an impact. But I certainly used to go on Reddit and then try and engage there and in inappropriate subreddits and, push it a bit on Twitter and tag the creators and stuff like that. Like I say, it doesn't really seem to yield much of a reward. Sometimes I still do it and sometimes I don't, but for whatever reason, yeah. Then you will have, on top of that, I will have to typically kind of revise and prep on the day for a couple of hours in order to make sure it's all in my head and it works, and kind of go through things again, make sure any stat blocks or whatever, things like that I need are there. And then we have to obviously run the actual stream. We tend to log on to StreamYard at least half an hour beforehand and kind of go through things as well. I hope what I'm bringing across is the amount of time and effort it takes to do something like this. Because I think people often feel that, especially when you stream something, that it's kind of been thrown together. But what I would say for anyone out there, maybe someone wants to dabble in this, maybe someone wants to, I don't think about how it's done. It's pretty time consuming stuff. And I've said this so many times, but running something on stream and making it look relatively competent is a completely different beast from doing it in person with friends. Because you've got to think about how you say things and what you say, and you can't really every 15 minutes go, oh, hold on a second, and just look something up in a book or whatever. I mean, you kind of can do that, but if you want to have any kind of veneer of professionalism, then it's not going to work. I guess the closest thing I'd relate it to is running a game at cons and stuff like that. But I think it's you're even more kind of on the hook in the moment. So it's quite a lot. This is termed from me kind of talking about our timetabling and game sign-up system to how much it takes to sort of plug in to a stream. But maybe it's interesting. I don't know. I'm just trying to throw anything on the wall on these. You know what? The most handy thing you can do for me right now is go down below into the comments or onto our Discord and let us know what you think of this. Is this a good format? Have the things I've talked about been interesting? Would you like to see me talk about anything else? Are there any particular topics you'd like? Would you like to see other people on the channel in this? If so, who? And what would you like to hear about from them? Okay, this has been the experimental first vlog. which I recorded all as one big chunk of 53 minutes, and now have to go and edit and make it look prettier and nicer and stuff. Yeah, thank you for watching. If you made it to the end, let me know. And like I say, all future ones of these, maybe we'll make one every year that's available. I don't know. But in general, all future ones of these will be for our £5 tier patrons on Patreon. I believe that's titled Tales of Secrecy. That's the one. So yeah, it's a teaser, but that's the nature of the beast. Don't hate the beast. Hate the beast. I'm going to sign off now. I think that's for the best. Bye.